Hello everyone and welcome back to Chessable Masters Group B. We have a very exciting game between Maxime, Vachier, Lagrave and Fabiano Caruana, two contenders of the 2020 Candidates Tournament. And it's just a very exciting game as the title suggests, so let's just dive straight into it. Maxime, with the white pieces, opens with d4. We have d5 by Fabi and c4. Sorry about that. And here, Fabi goes for c6. He goes for the Slav defense. Probably to not disclose anything he has maybe planned for the candidates, although I don't think they are, maybe they were trying to do so at first, but I don't think anyone is concealing any preparation, since we don't really have any idea when the candidates will resume. So c6, the Slav defense, knight f3, knight to f6, and now queen to c2, defending the pawn here, also fighting for e4 square. We have d captures on c4, queen captures, and the bishop to f5. This is the most played line of the Slav in 2020, so very modern. We have g3 and e6 now. As the light square bishop has been developed, you can now close the structure. Now we have bishop to g2 and bishop to e7. Both players prepare to castle, and they do. So castles, and here the most often move here is knight to c3, just continuing development, but Maxime wants to mix it up already with queen to b3. He puts pressure on b7, and much like you would have in pretty much, most Slavs, queen to b6. The queens do stare at each other, and white wants black to capture, so he gets a semi-open file for his rook, and black also wants white to capture, so black would get a semi-open file for the rook. So knight b to d2, Maxime continues development, and Fabi does the same. We have knight to c4, now trying to get Fabi to trade on b3, but Fabi just moves it. So queen to a6, still defending b7, but also if the knight moves in some lines, maybe the e2 pawn can be vulnerable. And here there is a game where knight c to e5 was played, also rook to d1 is a known move in this position. But bishop to g5, the move Maxime plays, is a new move, so already as of move 12 we have a completely new game. Of course, Fabi just continues development. Knight b to d7, the knight can come to b6, challenge white's knight on c4. We have rook f to e1, and now h6, asking, do you want to trade or do you want to go back? So Fabi goes back, MVL goes back, we have bishop to f4, and now knight to b6, with a double attack on the knight here, now asking, do you want to trade on b6 or not? And Fabi says, no thank you. So, Maxime. Knight c to e5, and here, finally, as white is controlling a lot more space, we have queen to a4 by Fabi. Now offering a queen trade here, which is usually a good idea when your opponent controls much more space. And here bishop back to d2. Maxime's idea is that if Fabi is eager to trade now, for example captures, and let's say knight b to d5, then he can be very annoying with this bishop to a5 move. You cannot play b6 because then the c6 pawn hangs, and then you can also pick up the bishop with check, so white would definitely come on top of that little combination. So after bishop d2, Fabi first adds another defender to the c6 pawn with bishop to e4. Now nicely defending the c6 pawn, and here Maxime decides to trade. We have captures, and now b3. We have knight back here, and now the b3 pawn will nicely prevent Fabi's knight from jumping to these squares, and bishop to a5 now, pinning the knight, not allowing it to come to d5. So here Fabi unpins, we have rook to d5, and now as the bishop is no longer needed here, bishop back to c3, just adding another defender here. Finally c5, Fabi really wants to get rid of this pawn. I don't know why this game I'm constantly mixing up their names, really weird. And here just e3, adding another defender to the d pawn, and rook d to d8. Now not rook a to d8, doubling up on the d file, but rather now Fabi just wants to free up the d5 square for his knight, which was the intention all along. So here rook e to d1, and now knight b to d5, challenging the bishop here. We have bishop to a5, now trying to provoke more weaknesses, so you weaken the c6 square. However, just rook d to c8. This was Fabi's idea by going back, freeing up the d5 square for the knight. And rook a to c1 now by MVL. Now you can go b6, as the rook also covers the c6 square, so bishop back all the way to e1, and now a5. Expanding on the queen side, MVL does the same. We have a4, And now rook to c7. Now Fabi is preparing to double up on the c file, maybe push c4 and try to create some chances along the c file. We have knight to c4 by MVL, now going for the b6 pawn, maybe in the future will be possible. And just rook 8 to c8, doubling up here. We have d captures on c5, sort of a nice capture fest will now take place. We have bishop captures on c5, grabbing that, and now knight to d4, opening up a discovery on the bishop here. Captures, and here bishop captures on d4. We have rook captures on d4, and now knight to d7. MVL's rook on c1 is undefended, so here maybe you can just attack it once again with knight to e5, put a lot of pressure on this knight here. However, MVL beats him to the punch with e4. Now this knight has to move, knight 5 to f6, and now rook c to d1, getting this rook out of harm's way, and now nicely doubling up on the d file. And rook to b8 by Fabi. Here MVL could be having some plans of maybe rook d6, f3, strengthening the e4 pawn and going after the b6 pawn, so Fabi just defends it prematurely and also prepares b5 to bust open the position here. So f3, MVL strengthens the center, and now king to h7. Just a safer square for the king. Maybe you can also bring it into the game after king g6. We have g4 by white, now taking away the h5 square from the knight, and also just preparing h4, g5, and so on. So here e5 by Fabi, and now here rook to d6. MVL just continued with his plan, but bishop to g3 was also very interesting, because if captures, then just captures, and this pawn would be very weak on d4, and you would be having a lot of targets here after bishop captures on c7, so it wouldn't really be all that great for black. However, MVL continues with his original plan, rook d6, and now knight to c5. Here, Fabi just tries to give up the e5 pawn for the b3 pawn, and MVL accepts this. He goes for knight captures on e5. We have knight captures on b3, and now h4. Now that the rook is nicely covering the 6th rank, you want to play g5, let's say captures, kick away the knight, and then put a lot of pressure on the black king. So here we have b5. Fabi now, of course, wants to play on the queen side, as MVL tries to attack on the king side. With b5, at least one passed pawn will be created, so it does make sense to go for this. But MVL continues with his king side plan. So g5, we have knight to h5, with some knight to f4 check ideas in the future, and knight to d7 now. Very, very interesting move by MVL. And here he asks black, what do you want to do? Your rook is under attack. If you move the rook somewhere else, I'm just going to gobble up your pawn. So you could play rook b to b7 and then just wait for me to do my thing. But then you leave the back rank open to some checks here. Knight f8, the rook can come to the back rank. So here instead Fabi goes for a more active plan. He gives up the pawn with rook b to c8. And Maxime accepts it. And now, by accepting it, both players now have created a pass pawn. And Fabi immediately starts pushing it, which does make sense as his knight already controls the a1 queening square. But Maxime's knight also controls the b8 queening square. So Maxime also starts pushing b6. We have rook to b7, and now bishop to b4. Maxime prevents Fabi from pushing the pawn all the way to a3. We have knight to f4 check, king to g3, and now knight back to e6, helping out with the defense. And here MVL goes for the very strong king to g4. You could play a lot of moves here, like captures, you could play f4, f5, but MVL wants to bring the king closer to the action. And here black's position is very, very difficult to play. You can't really move the rooks. This rook has to stay here, otherwise b7 will come at some point. You cannot push a3. This knight doesn't really have any good squares. The c5 is covered twice, and you don't really want to trade even further. And it's really not an easy position. For example, you could try something like rook c4 to try and disconnect the white rooks. Let's say bishop a3 and now knight d4. Now you've disconnected the rooks. However, after bishop to b2, it's again very hard for black to even find a move. So instead, after this king to g4 move, Fabi went for rook to c2. He wants to play something like captures, and then rook to g2 check to pick up the g5 pawn with a very clean idea. However, this completely loses the game. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the winning idea for MVL while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting that you can remove the defender of the knight on e6. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's g6 check. And here, no move is good. For example, if you capture, then you no longer defend the knight, just rook captures knight, which is of course completely winning for white. On the other hand, you could go to h8, but then just g captures on f7 creates a winning pass pawn. So it only makes sense to go to g8, but then you get the g captures with check, king captures, and knight to e5 with check. And now after king moves to f6, now just rook to d5. And there isn't really a lot black can do here. The king will be overrun by white's pieces. For example, if you try something like rook g2 check, king h3, and rook back to e2, then it's just knight to g4 check. And there are no good moves here. You don't want to go here in front of the bishop, so you might go king to f7, but then rook d7 check. And let's say after this is all traded, captures, captures, king g6, now the b pawn is winning. You don't want to run into some knight f4 check tricks to allow, let's say, black a perpetual knight f4 check followed by knight h5 check and so on, since the rook covers this. But a nice, let's say, h5 check, just taking away the h5 square from the black knight, will be easily winning for white. Let's say knight now after checking g3, and now there's nothing to be done here. Next move, you're going to queen and win the game. So instead, after g6, Fabi did the only thing he could. He played king captures on g6, but now it's actually a forced checkmate in 4. So feel free to pause the video once again and try to find the exact sequence that mates in 4 while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding the exact sequence that wins. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight to f8 check. Not leaving the king with any ideas, these squares are taken, so the king, only square for the king is f6, and now comes the move that makes it all possible, e5 with check. Leaving black with 2 options, but none of them are good. It's either captures or king e7. If you decline this juicy pawn, then after king e7, it's now you're in front of the bishop, so rook e6 is checkmate. It's really wonderful as the knight defends the rook. It's actually a double check from the rook and the bishop, so you have to flee. It's the old saying, even the laziest king flees in the face of a double check. And everything is nicely protected. The bishop defends the knight defends the rook, and this rook covers the entire d file, so nothing to be done here. So you would have to capture on e5, which Fabi did, and now comes rook c6 to d5. This comes with check, only one option for the black king, king f6, and now the finishing move, rook to f5 checkmate, as the knight covers g6, pawn, king, and rook cover this, and the bishop covers e7. Of course, the king has nowhere to go. So that's the game. Really a spectacular game. 50 moves, but ending with a checkmate on the board. Very rarely happens between such elite players, members of the candidates tournament here. So I do hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, I would also like to thank Joshua Squasher, Hartmut Gekala, Trikul Islam, Brian Sewell, and Juan Vincente Alvarez for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. And also I would like to thank over 100 of you who joined the membership program yesterday. I do not have enough room here on the interface to name all of you, but the agadmator.com website is almost fully operational, and you will all be credited there under supporters and contributors. So thank you all for that as well. So, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys soon. Have an excellent rest of your day.